There are some losses in life that change you forever, and for Eirik the Broad-Shouldered, losing his wife and children to plague 5 winters ago left him hollow as an empty longhouse. The giant Viking warrior who once commanded respect across the northern fjords now lives alone, surrounded only by the scent of pine smoke and his own regrets. When Astrid, a bold city woman, arrives at his remote settlement seeking passage to distant lands, she brings something he thought was lost forever: the gentle presence of a woman. Her arrival stirs the village elders and challenges everything Eirik has built in his solitude. But when this weathered warrior finally speaks the words that have haunted him for years, that he has forgotten what woman smelled like, their worlds begin to change. Will Astrid's love heal his broken heart, or will the clash between her modern ways and his ancient traditions tear them both apart? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The carved wooden memorial stone stood silent in the morning frost, its runes weathered but still legible to those who knew how to read the old ways. Eirik had shaped it himself, with hands that once wielded sword and axe in distant battles, carving each mark with the precision of grief. Ingrid, beloved wife; Bjorn and Astrid, cherished children. The plague had taken them all in the span of 7 days, leaving him with nothing but memories and the echo of laughter that no longer filled his modest dwelling. 5 winters had passed since then, and Eirik the Broad-Shouldered had become something of a legend in reverse, a warrior who chose exile over glory, solitude over companionship. His longhouse sat at the edge of Ravensfjord, a settlement of perhaps 60 souls, clustered around the protected harbour where the dark waters met steep cliffs carved by ancient ice. Here, where the northern winds carried the scent of pine and salt, he had built his sanctuary of silence. The dwelling itself reflected his transformation from conqueror to hermit. Where once his halls had echoed with the songs of skalds and the laughter of feast guests, now only the crackle of hearth-fire broke the stillness. His battle-worn axe hung above the mantel, its blade dark with the patina of disuse. The weapon that had cleaved enemy shields and carved his reputation across 3 kingdoms, now served only as a reminder of who he used to be. Eirik rose before dawn each day, as warriors do, though no enemy awaited him beyond the mist-shrouded peaks. His routine had become as rigid as the ice that formed on his water basin each winter morning. First the fire, coaxing flame from ember with the patience of a man who had learned that rushing brought no reward. Then bread, dark and dense, baked from grain he grew in the small plot behind his home. Finally, the walk to the memorial stone, where he would stand in whatever weather the gods provided and speak to the silence where voices used to answer. "The snow comes early this year," he would say, his voice rough from disuse. The younglings in the village worry about their first real winter, but Magnus tells them tales of the great frost 40 years past. They listen with wide eyes, thinking themselves brave for enduring what their grandfathers survived as children. The conversations with stone and memory had become his anchor, the one thread connecting his present solitude to the man he had been. When love filled his days, sometimes he could almost hear Ingrid's gentle laughter at his tendency to lecture even the dead, or feel the tug of small hands demanding his attention. But the illusions never lasted long enough, and he would return to his tasks with the methodical precision of a man determined to fill every moment with purpose, lest darker thoughts find room to take root. The village of Ravensfjord respected his chosen isolation, though not without concern. Magnus Ironbeard, the settlement's elder and Eirik's closest friend from their raiding days, made it his business to check on the hermit warrior at least once each week. Their relationship had weathered 30 years of shared battles and personal loss, creating a bond that transcended mere friendship. "You cannot mourn forever, old friend," Magnus would say during his visits, settling his considerable bulk onto the bench beside Eirik's hearth. "The dead do not ask us to die with them. I am not dead," Eirik would reply, though his voice carried little conviction. "I work, I eat, I sleep. What more defines living? Joy," Magnus always answered. Hope, the possibility that tomorrow might hold something worth waking for beyond mere duty. These conversations followed a familiar pattern, comfortable in their predictability. Magnus would share news from the village, whose daughter had married, which families expected new children, what ships had been spotted on the distant horizon. Eirik would listen with the attention he had once given to battle plans, storing each detail in a mind trained to notice patterns and changes. The other villagers treated him with a mixture of reverence and gentle worry. Old women would leave, fresh bread on his doorstep without ceremony, disappearing before he could emerge to thank them. Young men would find excuses to walk past his dwelling, hoping to catch a glimpse of the legendary warrior whose exploits their fathers recounted. On winter nights, children dared each other to approach his door, then ran shrieking with delighted terror when he appeared, though he never failed to wave, and those brave enough to look back always saw his small smile. Young Olaf, barely 18 and eager to prove his worth as a fisherman, had appointed himself as an unofficial messenger between Eirik and the community. The boy possessed an earnest nature that reminded Eirik painfully of his own son at that age, all enthusiasm and noble intentions, untested by the harsh truths that time inevitably teaches. "The nets were full yesterday," Olaf would report, his eyes bright with the joy of small successes. "Father says the herring run will last another week if the weather holds. We could use another pair of hands hauling nets if you were interested in honest work." Eirik always declined such invitations politely, but he appreciated the boy's persistence. There was something pure in Olaf's determination to include him, untainted by the complicated emotions that made other adults approach with careful deference. The young fisherman saw not the fearsome warrior of legend, nor the tragic figure of recent years, but simply a man who might enjoy useful work and companionship. The landscape itself seemed to reflect Eirik's internal state. Beautiful but harsh, shaped by forces beyond human control, Ravensfjord lay cradled between towering peaks whose snow-covered summits caught the first light of dawn and held it like captured stars. The fjord waters ran deep and dark, fed by streams that tumbled down, rocky faces in waterfalls that froze to silver curtains each winter. Pine forests clung to impossible slopes, their roots finding purchase in cracks between granite stones, surviving through stubbornness and adaptation. In summer, the days stretched long enough to forget that darkness existed and the air filled with the songs of seabirds and the distant lowing of cattle in mountain pastures. But winter claimed the land for months at a time, burying it under snow and wrapping it in nights that seemed to have no end. It was a place that demanded strength from those who chose to call it home, giving back beauty and bounty only to those who earned them through endurance. Eirik had chosen this exile deliberately, drawn by the way the harsh landscape matched his internal wilderness. Here, his solitude felt natural rather than imposed, and his daily battles against cold and isolation seemed fitting penance for the crime of surviving when his family had not. The settlement was small enough that everyone knew everyone else's sorrows, yet large enough that a man could find privacy when he needed it. His dwelling sat slightly apart from the main cluster of buildings, positioned to catch the morning sun, while offering protection from the fierce winds that swept down from the peaks. He had built it with his own hands in the months after the plague, pouring his grief into the work of shaping logs and fitting stones. Every beam had been selected for strength, every joint crafted to last beyond his own lifetime. It was both home and monument, a place to live and a testament to the permanence he had failed to build for those he loved. The interior reflected a man who had learned to find satisfaction in simplicity. A single great room served as kitchen, hall, and workshop, with a smaller chamber beyond for sleeping. The hearth dominated one wall, its stones blackened by countless fires and carved with protective runes his grandmother had taught him as a child. Above it hung his axe, and beside it stood the carved chair where Ingrid used to sit while he whittled toys for their children. Tools lined the walls with military precision, each in its proper place, maintained with the care of a warrior who understood that his life might depend on his equipment. But these were tools of peace now, saws and chisels for woodworking, needles and thread for mending clothes, pots and pans for cooking solitary meals. He had become skilled in all the domestic arts that wives usually managed, learning through necessity and approaching each task with the methodical attention he had once brought to planning raids. The sleeping chamber held little beyond a bed, and a wooden chest that remained locked, its contents too precious and too painful for daily confrontation. Sometimes, in the deep watches of winter nights, he would hold the key and listen to his own breathing in the darkness, weighing whether the comfort of memory was worth the agony of loss. He never opened it, but neither could he bring himself to throw away the key. This was the life Eirik had built from the ruins of his former existence, ordered, purposeful, and utterly alone. He had convinced himself that it was enough, that a man could find meaning in solitude if he approached it with sufficient discipline. The memorial stone bore witness to his daily devotions, and the axe on his wall reminded him of the strength that still lived in his aging frame. But on the morning when everything would change, as he stood before the memorial stone speaking to the frost-shrouded silence, he could not have imagined that by nightfall his careful isolation would lie in ruins. The storm approaching from the north carried more than snow and wind. It brought a woman whose presence would crack the ice around his heart and force him to remember what it meant to be alive. The storm struck Ravensfjord with the fury of an ancient god's wrath, driving snow sideways across the fjord and turning the familiar landscape into a world of white chaos. Eirik had seen the signs that morning, the particular quality of light that warned of weather, the way the wind shifted from the northwest, the restless behavior of the settlement's dogs. He had secured his dwelling and laid in extra firewood, expecting to wait out the tempest in familiar solitude. What he had not expected was the pounding on his door that came just as darkness fell. The sound cut through the wind's howl like an axe through wood, urgent, desperate, and utterly foreign to his ordered existence. For a moment he considered ignoring it. Magnus would have called out his name. Olaf would have shouted some boyish greeting. This was the knock of a stranger, and strangers brought complications he had no desire to face. But training dies hard. In Old Warriors, and the rhythm of those blows spoke of someone fighting against time and weather. Eirik lifted his axe from above the hearth, not in threat but from habit, and approached the door. "Who seeks shelter?" he called, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to command. "A traveller caught by the storm," came the reply, and Eirik's weathered features drew into a frown of surprise. The voice was female, speaking accented Norse with the careful precision of one who had learned the language in trading ports rather than growing up with it. "I beg the hospitality your people are known for." Eirik's hand hesitated on the door bar. 5 years of isolation had not prepared him for this moment, a woman alone in a blizzard, invoking the sacred laws of guest right that no honorable Viking could refuse. Yet something in her voice, a quality he could not name, made his heart beat faster in his chest. He lifted the bar and opened the door. The wind drove snow into his face with stinging force, but through the white curtain he could see her, a figure wrapped in a heavy traveling cloak bent against the storm's fury. She was not tall, perhaps reaching his chest, but she carried herself with a bearing that spoke of strength and determination. Her hood had fallen back, revealing dark hair plastered against her skull by snow and wind, and eyes that met his with direct, unflinching regard. "Come," he said simply, stepping aside to let her enter. She stumbled across the threshold, bringing with her the scent of wet wool and something else, something that made him step back as if struck. It was a woman's scent, clean and warm beneath the storm's harshness, and it hit him with the force of memory so strong he nearly dropped his axe. "My thanks," she gasped, pushing the door closed against the wind while he stood frozen. "I thought I would die out there." Her voice, now that she was not shouting over the storm, carried notes that belonged in southern trading halls rather than northern fishing villages. There was education in her speech, refinement that spoke of cities and courts rather than the rough equality of settlement life. As she lowered her hood and shook snow from her dark hair, Eirik found himself staring like a boy seeing his first sword. She was beautiful, but not in the way Viking women were beautiful, where his people prized golden hair and fair skin marked by northern sun and wind. This woman's beauty was darker, more exotic. Her hair fell in waves to her shoulders, dark as pine bark and touched with reddish highlights that caught the firelight. Her skin held the warmth of southern sun, and her eyes were the deep blue-green of deep water. "You are hurt," he managed, his voice rougher than the storm outside. She looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time the tears in her cloak and the mud on her boots. "Bruised, perhaps. I took shelter in a cave for most of the day, but when the storm worsened, I tried to reach the settlement. I lost the path in the snow." As she spoke, she was unbuckling a leather satchel from her belt, and Eirik's trained eye noted the quality of the leather, the silver fittings, the careful craftsmanship that spoke of wealth. This was no ordinary traveller caught by weather. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the bench near the fire. "I will bring food." But she did not sit. Instead, she moved through his dwelling with the alert interest of someone cataloguing details for future reference. Her gaze took in the axe he still held, the orderly arrangement of his possessions, the single cup and plate that spoke of solitude. "You live alone," she observed, and there was no judgment in her voice, merely curiosity. "Yes. By choice or by circumstance?" The question was more direct than politeness usually allowed, but something in her manner suggested she was accustomed to asking direct questions. Eirik set his axe back in its place above the hearth, using the action to buy time for thought. "By choice," he said finally. "I am Eirik Bjornsson, called the Broad-Shouldered. This is my home." She turned to face him fully then, and he saw recognition flicker in her eyes. His reputation, it seemed, had travelled even to whatever distant place had shaped her accent. "I am Astrid," she said simply. "Astrid of—" She paused as if reconsidering her words. "Astrid of the eastern trading routes. I seek passage to the lands beyond the ice." "In winter?" The incredulity in his voice was unmistakable. "No ship sails those waters until spring. The ice will not break for months yet. Then I will wait for spring." Her chin lifted with a stubbornness that reminded him uncomfortably of his own daughter at that age. "I have coin to pay for shelter and food." "This is not an inn," Eirik said, more harshly than he intended. "This is a settlement of farmers and fishermen. We do not take in strangers for coin." "Then what do you take them in for?" she asked, and there was challenge in her voice now, matching his tone. "Your reputation says you were once an honourable man. Has grief made you forget the laws of hospitality?" The words struck him like a physical blow, all the more painful for their accuracy. He had been about to turn her away, to send her into the storm, rather than disrupt the careful order of his isolation. The realization shamed him, and shame made his voice hard. "You may shelter here tonight," he said. "Tomorrow, when the storm passes, Magnus will find you proper lodging in the village." "I thank you," she replied, but her voice carried no gratitude, only acknowledgement of a bargain struck. An uncomfortable silence settled between them, broken only by the winds howling and the pop of burning logs. Eirik busied himself preparing food, bread and dried fish, cheese stored in oil, small beer that would warm her after the storm's chill. But his hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as he worked, and he cursed them for their betrayal. It was the scent of her that undid him. As warmth returned to her chilled body, it rose from her skin like incense from temple fires. Not just the clean smell of woman, but something more complex. Foreign spices, perhaps, or oils used for washing. Hair. The memory of intimate moments flooded back unbidden. Ingrid braiding her hair by candlelight, the whisper of wool as she undressed for bed, the way she smelled of home and safety and love. "I forgot what woman smelled like," he said suddenly, the words escaping before he could stop them. She looked up from arranging her wet cloak by the fire, startled by the raw honesty in his voice. For a moment, their eyes met across the small space, and something passed between them, recognition of pain shared, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that both carried burdens too heavy for easy words. "How long have you been alone?" she asked, softly. "5 years, since the plague took my family. I am sorry for your loss." The formal words should have meant nothing, but something in her voice, a quality of understanding rather than mere politeness, made them feel like more than ritual. She spoke like someone who knew what loss meant, who had perhaps faced her own dark nights of the soul. "Why do you seek the lands beyond the ice?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. This time it was her turn to hesitate, and he saw shadows move behind her eyes like clouds across water. "Because I cannot go back," she said finally, "and sometimes moving forward is the only choice left to us." Outside, the storm raged with undiminished fury, sealing them together in the warm circle of firelight. Neither spoke of the morning or what it might bring. But as Eirik prepared sleeping furs for his unexpected guest, he found himself noticing details he had tried to forget. The way candlelight played across a woman's features, the rustle of fabric as she moved, the simple fact that he was no longer alone with his memories. The leather satchel sat beside her makeshift bed, and he wondered what secrets it held, what treasures or necessities a woman carried when fleeing toward unknown lands. But those were questions for another time. For now, it was enough that the storm had brought change to his ordered world, whether he welcomed it or not. Dawn brought an end to the storm and the beginning of complications Eirik had not anticipated. He woke to the sound of Astrid moving about his dwelling, and for a heartbeat, the familiar domestic noises transported him back 5 years to mornings when such sounds meant comfort rather than intrusion. Then reality reasserted itself, and he rose to face whatever challenges this foreign woman would bring to his carefully ordered world. She had risen before him, a fact that both surprised and obscured his pride. Most city dwellers, in his experience, were soft creatures who slept late and complained of discomfort, but Astrid stood at his small window, fully dressed and alert, watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of rose and gold. "It is beautiful," she said without turning. "I had not imagined such beauty could exist so far from civilization." "This is civilization," Eirik replied, perhaps more sharply than necessary. "Different from yours, but no less real." She turned. Then, and he saw she had been crying, not from grief but from cold air and wind brightness. Still, the sight of tears on her face stirred something protective in his chest that he tried to ignore. "I meant no disrespect," she said. "In the cities, where I have lived, beauty is something man creates, gardens and sculptures, painted walls and worked metal. This," she gestured toward the window, "this is the god's own artistry." Her words carried genuine appreciation rather than mere politeness, and Eirik felt his irritation fade. Perhaps he had grown too accustomed to defending his chosen exile against those who saw it as retreat rather than refuge. "You will need proper clothing if you stay until spring," he said, studying her travel-stained garments. "What you wear is suited for southern roads, not northern winters. I can pay—" "Not everything requires coin," he interrupted. "Magnus's wife is skilled with needle and thread. She will help you if I ask it of her." Astrid's expression shifted, and he recognized the look of someone unused to depending on others' kindness. In the trading cities, he supposed, everything had its price, and every favor carried obligation. The concept of help freely given would be foreign to her. Why would you do this for a stranger? The question was fair, and one he was not certain he could answer honestly. Something about her presence had awakened instincts he thought buried with his family. The need to protect, to provide, to show strength in service of others, rather than mere survival. "Because you are here," he said finally, "and because winter kills the unprepared." She studied his face as if seeking hidden meanings, but eventually nodded. "Then I accept your help, with gratitude." The walk to Magnus's dwelling gave Eirik his first opportunity to see how the village would react to his unexpected guest. Word of the stranger's arrival had already spread. In a settlement of 60 souls, few secrets lasted past sunrise. Children peered from doorways with undisguised curiosity, while adults offered polite nods that barely concealed their questions. Astrid handled their attention with practiced ease, acknowledging greetings with just enough warmth to seem friendly without encouraging familiarity. She walked beside him with confident strides, apparently unbothered by the stares or whispered conversations that followed in their wake. Magnus emerged from his dwelling before they reached the door, his weathered face carefully neutral. "So, this is our storm-blown guest," he said, offering a slight bow. "I am Magnus Ironbeard, elder of this settlement. Astrid of the eastern trading routes," she replied, returning the bow with precise formality. "I seek winter shelter and spring passage to the lands beyond the ice." "Direct words," Magnus observed approvingly. "I respect that in a woman. My Sigrid will see to your needs. She has daughters and granddaughters whose clothes might suit you, while she prepares new ones." The introduction to Sigrid proved less smooth than Magnus's acceptance. The elder's wife was a formidable woman who had raised 5 children and buried 2, leaving her with strong opinions about proper behavior and little patience for what she deemed foolishness. She looked Astrid up and down with the assessing gaze of one evaluating livestock at market. "City soft," she declared without preamble. "Look at those hands, never done honest work. And traveling alone? What manner of family allows such recklessness?" "Sigrid," Magnus warned, but his wife waved him silent. "I speak truth, old man. This one brings complications we do not need." She turned back to Astrid. "But you are here, and winter shows no mercy to the foolish. Come inside before you freeze." Inside, the warmth of Magnus's hall, surrounded by the busy domesticity of a large household, Astrid seemed to shrink slightly. The confidence she had shown outdoors faltered in the face of Sigrid's brisk efficiency and the curious stares of 3 young women who were introduced as daughters and daughters-in-law. "Remove those wet things," Sigrid commanded, producing an armload of woolen garments. "You are nearly the size of my Helga. These should fit well enough until proper clothes can be made." What followed was an education in the gulf between Astrid's world and theirs. The simple act of changing clothes became an exercise in cultural collision as Astrid struggled with unfamiliar fastenings and found herself overwhelmed by the practical construction of Viking women's dress. The ancient loom that dominated one corner of the room represented everything she was expected to master but clearly had not. When Sigrid demonstrated the proper technique for working the wool, Astrid's attempts were so clumsy that the youngest daughter giggled before her mother's sharp look silenced her. "Have you never worked at a loom?" Sigrid asked, her tone suggesting this was akin to admitting illiteracy. "In the cities, we buy cloth already woven," Astrid replied, her cheeks coloring with embarrassment. "I can work with needle and thread, but this—" She gestured helplessly at the complex array of weights and heddles. "Then you will learn," Sigrid declared. "No woman in my house remains idle while winter keeps us indoors. Helga will teach you the basics." Eirik watched this domestic drama unfold with mixed feelings. Part of him was pleased to see Astrid challenged by the realities of settlement life. Perhaps it would convince her to seek easier shelter elsewhere when spring came. But another part of him, a part he tried to suppress, felt protective of her. "Obvious discomfort she learns quickly," he found himself saying. "Give her time to understand our ways." Magnus shot him a knowing look, but Sigrid merely snorted. "Time we have, since she claims to be staying until spring. Whether she has the will to use it properly remains to be seen. As they prepared to leave, laden with borrowed clothes and promises of weaving lessons, Magnus drew Eirik aside. "A word, old friend." They stepped out into the crisp morning air, their breath forming clouds in the cold. Magnus's expression had grown serious, the easy hospitality replaced by concern. "She is not what she claims to be," he said quietly. "That accent places her from the southern courts, and those clothes, even travel-stained, they are too fine for a simple trader. What are you suggesting?" "I am suggesting that runaway nobles bring trouble in their wake. And trouble is something our peaceful settlement can ill afford." Eirik considered his friend's words, knowing them to be wise. Magnus had not survived 30 years of raiding and 40 years of leadership by ignoring warning signs, yet something in Eirik rebelled against the implication. "She has asked for shelter, not conquest," he said. "And she offers payment for what she receives, does she? Or does she offer the promise of payment while hiding debts that might follow her here?" Magnus laid a hand on Eirik's shoulder. "I do not say she means harm, but intentions and outcomes are not always the same thing." As they walked back toward Eirik's dwelling, Astrid silent between them, he found himself watching her with new awareness. The way she carried herself, the quality of her attention to their surroundings, the careful precision of her speech, all spoke of someone accustomed to concealing as much as she revealed. Perhaps Magnus was right to counsel caution, but as Astrid stumbled slightly on the icy path and his hand moved instinctively to steady her, Eirik realized that caution was a luxury his heart could no longer afford. The silver bracelet caught the firelight as Astrid worked, its intricate patterns speaking of craftsmanship that belonged in royal halls rather than fishing settlements. She wore it always, Eirik had noticed, even when other jewelry had been set aside for practical work. Now, as she struggled with the simple task of preparing fish for their evening meal, the ornament seemed to mock her efforts at domestic normalcy. "The scales must come away cleanly," Eirik said, demonstrating the proper angle of the knife. "See how the blade follows the natural lines? Like this." 3 days had passed since the storm, and an uneasy routine had developed between them. Astrid proved eager to learn the skills necessary for settlement life, but her unfamiliarity with basic tasks revealed the vast distance between her former existence and present circumstances. Tasks that any Viking child mastered by their 10th year required patient explanation and repeated demonstration. "In the cities," she said, concentrating on the fish before her, "servants handled such work. I know it sounds foolish now, but I never considered how food reached the table beyond the paying of coin." "Not foolish," Eirik replied, though privately. He wondered what manner of life sheltered someone so completely from basic necessities. "Different. Your skills lie elsewhere. I have seen how quickly you learn, how well you observe. These are merely new applications of abilities you already possess." She looked up at that, surprise flickering across her features. "You are kinder than I expected from one with your reputation." "What did you expect? A man of war, I suppose. Hard words and harder actions. The stories told of Eirik the Broad-Shouldered speak of a warrior who showed no mercy to his enemies." "The stories are not lies," he said quietly. "But enemies and guests are different things. A man may be both fierce in battle and gentle in his own hall. Indeed, one often requires the other." Their conversations had taken on this quality of careful exploration, each learning the boundaries and depths of the other's experience. Astrid shared fragments of her past with the calculated precision of someone accustomed to revealing only what served her purposes, while Eirik found himself speaking of things he had not discussed with anyone since Ingrid's death. "Tell me about them," she said one evening as they sat before the fire, her mending in her lap and his whittling knife busy with a piece of pine. "Your family, what were they like?" The question should have brought pain, and it did. But somehow, the ache felt less sharp than usual. Perhaps it was the domestic contentment of the moment, the quiet companionship, the simple tasks, the way firelight softened harsh lines and made even sorrow feel less isolating. Ingrid was wise, he said, his knife finding its rhythm in the wood. She saw through pretense to truth, and she never hesitated to speak what she observed. She would have liked you, I think, appreciated your intelligence and your refusal to be intimidated. And your children? Bjorn was 8, already showing promise with sword and shield. He wanted to be a great warrior like his father. Eirik's voice caught slightly. Astrid, my daughter, was 5 and fierce as a storm wind. She declared she would captain her own ship someday and sail farther than any man had gone before. Astrid set down her sewing, giving him her full attention. She shared my name. Yes, perhaps that is why. He stopped, not ready to voice the thought that her arrival had stirred memories, both painful and precious. Why you helped me, she finished gently. I understand. Sometimes the gods send us echoes of what we have lost, not to torture us, but to remind us that love does not die with the beloved. Her words carried the weight of personal knowledge, and he found himself studying her face in the flickering light. You speak as one who has loved and lost. We all lose in one way or another. The fortunate among us learn that loss does not diminish the value of what came before. That night, as he lay listening to her quiet breathing from the other side of the room, Eirik realized that something fundamental had shifted in his carefully ordered existence. The sharp edges of his grief had not disappeared, but they no longer cut as deeply. Her presence had begun to fill spaces in his days that he had not realized were empty. The village had begun to accept her as well, though not without reservations. Young Olaf, in particular, seemed smitten by her exotic beauty and worldly experience. The boy found excuses to visit Eirik's dwelling with increasing frequency, always carrying some small gift or offering help with tasks that required no assistance. You have an admirer, Eirik observed one morning after Olaf had departed, leaving behind a string of fish that were clearly the best of his catch. He is young, Astrid replied diplomatically. Such enthusiasms pass quickly when reality intrudes. And what if his enthusiasm were not so young? What if it belonged to a man of substance and experience? The question surprised him as much as it did her. He had not intended to voice it, had not even fully acknowledged the thought to himself. But something in her eyes, a flicker of awareness and possibility, made his heart beat faster. Then I would consider whether such a man's interest was born of loneliness or genuine affection, she said carefully, and whether my own feelings ran deeper than gratitude for kindness shown. They were dancing around the edges of something neither was quite ready to name, their words carrying meanings that neither quite dared to speak directly. But the awareness grew between them like spring ice beginning to crack, dangerous and inevitable. The silver bracelet caught the light again as she reached for her cup, and this time Eirik could not resist his curiosity. That ornament, it holds special meaning. Her fingers moved to touch it, a gesture so automatic it spoke of long habit. A gift from someone I once thought to marry. I keep it not from sentiment, but as a reminder of the danger of trusting appearances over truth. He proved unworthy. He proved to be exactly what he had always been. I was the fool for believing otherwise. Her voice carried bitterness, but also strength. We see what we wish to see, especially when desire clouds judgment. And now, what do you see now? She met his eyes directly, and in that moment the careful distance they had maintained began to crumble. I see a good man who has forgotten his own worth because grief convinced him he deserved nothing but solitude. I see strength being wasted in service of sorrow and kindness hidden behind walls built of guilt. And I see a woman running from something she will not name, carrying secrets that may endanger everyone around her. The words were harsh, but his tone was gentle, yet I find I care less about those secrets with each passing day. The admission hung between them like smoke from a dying fire, visible but fragile. Neither moved to disturb it. but neither could quite look away from what it implied. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow from the high peaks, promising that winter's grip would not loosen for months yet. Inside, two people who had thought themselves beyond the reach of new affections discovered that the heart recognizes no seasons, acknowledges no convenient timing. The silver bracelet gleamed. In the firelight, a reminder of past mistakes and future possibilities, while somewhere in the growing darkness between them, love began to take root in soil. Neither had thought fertile for such growth. The faded love letters lay hidden beneath layers of wool and leather in Eirik's locked chest, their parchment yellowed with age and handling. He had not looked at them in 2 years, but their presence haunted him as surely as if they were spread before him on the table. Ingrid's careful script, her playful words from the early days of their courtship, her promises of eternal devotion, all waiting in the darkness like accusations of betrayal. It was these letters he thought of as he watched Astrid move through, his dwelling with increasing familiarity, her presence transforming the space from hermitage to home with each passing day. She had been with him for a week now, and the careful formality of their early interactions had given way to something more dangerous, the easy intimacy of shared purpose and growing trust. "You seem troubled," she observed, looking up from the leather she was oiling for him. The domestic task suited her better than the loom, requiring precision rather than strength, and she had taken to it with the thoroughness she brought to everything. She attempted. "I am thinking of the past," he admitted, settling across from her at the table, "of promises made and how time changes their meaning." "Promises to your wife?" Her directness no longer surprised him. She had a gift for cutting through prevarication to reach the heart of matters. It was a quality he had come to appreciate, even when it made him uncomfortable. Among others, "I swore to love her until death, and I meant it absolutely. Yet here I sit, finding pleasure in another woman's company, and I wonder what manner of man that makes me." Astrid set down the leather and oil, giving him her full attention. "It makes you human. Love is not a finite resource that diminishes with use. Surely your wife would not have wanted you to bury your heart with her body." "She was a practical woman," he said slowly. "She often spoke of what should happen if death took one of us first. But speaking of such things in abstract and facing their reality are very different experiences." "What did she say?" "That life was for the living, and that love honored the beloved by continuing rather than dying." He managed a rueful smile. "She also said that any woman foolish enough to take me on deserved whatever trouble I brought to her days." Astrid laughed, the sound bright in the firelit room. "She sounds like a woman of great wisdom and good humor. I think I would have liked her very much." "And she would have seen through your secrets within an hour," Eirik said. But there was no accusation in his voice, only affectionate warning. "Perhaps, but would she have cared if she judged my intentions honorable?" The question went to the heart of his struggle. Ingrid had possessed an unerring instinct for character, able to separate worth from circumstance with almost supernatural accuracy. She had looked beyond his fearsome reputation to see the man beneath, just as she had welcomed outcasts and strangers into their home, based on some inner calculation he had never fully understood. "No," he said finally, "she would have judged you by your actions, not your origins. Then let her wisdom guide you now. Judge me by what you have seen, not by what you imagine I might be hiding." Their eyes met across the small table, and something passed between them that had been building for days. Acknowledgement of attraction, recognition of possibility, the dangerous moment when friendship began to transform into something deeper. Eirik felt his heart hammering against his ribs, like a caged bird seeking freedom. Astrid, she rose from her chair and moved around the table to stand before him, close enough that he could smell the lavender oil she used in her hair, could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat. "You are not betraying her memory by allowing yourself to feel again," she said softly. "You are honoring her love by proving it was strong enough to teach you how to love again." When she reached out to touch his face, her fingers gentle against. His bearded cheek he did not pull away. Instead he closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the simple pleasure of human touch, the warmth of connection he had denied himself for so long. "I'm afraid," he whispered. "Of what?" "Of losing again, of caring for someone only to watch them disappear like smoke. Everything ends, Eirik. Seasons, lives, even mountains eventually crumble to dust. But ending does not negate what came before. Love exists in its own right, valuable for itself, not for its duration." When he opened his eyes, she was studying his face with an expression he could not quite read. Tender, yes, but also calculating, as if she were measuring something against some internal standard. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I have been alone for a long time as well. That I came here seeking passage to distant lands, but find myself wondering if I have already arrived where I was meant to be." The words should have brought joy, but instead they stirred unease in Eirik's chest. There was something in her manner, a quality of performance that reminded him she was skilled in the arts of persuasion. How much of what he saw was genuine, a feeling, and how much was calculated to achieve some purpose he could not yet see? "You still do not trust me," she observed, reading his expression with disconcerting accuracy. "I want to, but I am a warrior, trained to recognize deception, and you, Astrid of the eastern trading routes, are not entirely what you claim to be." She stepped back then, creating distance between them, and he saw walls rising behind her eyes. "What makes you say that?" "Small things, the way you hold yourself, the unconscious habits of someone raised to command rather than serve, the quality of your belongings, the education in your speech, the calluses on your hands. Not from labor, but from weapons training." She was silent for a long moment, and he could see her weighing options, calculating risks. Finally she sighed. "You are more observant than I gave you credit for. Will you tell me the truth? Some of it, as much as I can without endangering us both." It was not the answer he had hoped for, but it was more than he had expected. In the world of courts and politics that had shaped her, he supposed complete honesty was a luxury few could afford. "I am nobility," she said simply. "Third, daughter of a minor earl, educated in languages and statecraft, trained to be married off for political advantage." The eastern trading routes part was true. My family controlled several such routes, but I am here not as a trader, but as a runaway. Running from what? A marriage I could not accept to a man I could not tolerate, arranged by a father who saw me as currency to be spent on alliances. Her voice carried old pain and fresh determination. "I chose freedom over duty, poverty over politics." Eirik considered her words, weighing truth against possibility. "And if they find you, they will drag me back in chains if necessary." My betrothal was not merely a marriage contract. It was a treaty between rival houses, sealed with my life. A surety. The implications struck him like a blow from a warhammer. If she spoke truth, then her presence here endangered not just herself, but everyone who had given her shelter. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "Would you have helped me if you had known?" The question hung between them like a blade, sharp with truth they both understood. He wanted to say yes, wanted to believe his honor would have compelled aid regardless of risk. But honesty demanded acknowledgement that fear for his adopted community might have overcome compassion for one stranger. "I do not know," he admitted. Then, "I was wise to wait until you knew me well enough to judge whether the woman was worth the risk she carried." Before he could respond, she leaned down and pressed her lips to his, gently, questioningly, giving him the chance to pull away. Instead, he found himself responding, his arms coming up to encircle her, 5 years of loneliness and denial crashing down like walls before a siege engine. The kiss tasted of possibilities and dangers in equal measure, sweet as summer honey and bitter as winter wind. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Eirik looked into her eyes and saw his own reflection. Two people who had found something precious and feared to lose it. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we decide whether love is stronger than fear," she replied, "whether what we have found together is worth fighting for." Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow and the distant howling of wolves. Inside, two hearts that had thought themselves beyond such risks began to beat in dangerous synchrony. The hand-forged iron key felt heavy in Astrid's palm as Eirik placed it there, his weathered fingers closing hers around the cold metal. 5 winters of secrets lay locked behind the simple mechanism, and the trust implied in this gesture struck her more deeply than any declaration of love could have. "Are you certain?" she asked, studying his face in the morning light that streamed through the window. 3 days had passed since their first kiss. 3 days of careful exploration of boundaries, both physical and emotional, and still she could read uncertainty in his eyes. "No," he admitted with characteristic honesty, "but certainty is a luxury I can no longer afford. If we are to move forward together, you must know all of what you would be accepting." The chest sat in the corner of his sleeping chamber, its dark wood polished smooth by years of handling. Eirik had touched it often. She realized now, not opening it, but drawing comfort from its solid presence, like a man fingering prayer beads. The lock was well-oiled despite its age, and the key turned with the soft click of metal finding its proper place. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth against the dampness, lay the preserved fragments of his former life. Ingrid's letters, carefully tied with a ribbon that had once been blue but had faded to the color of winter sky. A child's wooden sword, carved with loving detail and worn smooth by small hands. A woman's comb, its teeth carved from whalebone and decorated with silver wire. A lock of golden hair, still holding traces of the lavender oil she had favored. "She was beautiful," Astrid said, lifting a small portrait painted on ivory. The woman who looked back at her had kind eyes and laugh lines that spoke of joy freely shared, and Astrid felt no jealousy, only gratitude that such a woman had existed to teach Eirik how to love completely. Beautiful, yes, but more than that. She saw the world clearly, without the pretty lies that make harsh truths easier to bear. Eirik's voice carried the reverence of memory, undiminished by time. "She would have liked you, I think. You share." Her gift for seeing past surfaces to the heart of things. Astrid set the portrait aside carefully and lifted one of the letters, its seal already broken by countless readings. "May I?" At his nod, she unfolded the parchment and read words written 20 years ago by a woman dead 5 winters, words of love and longing, of dreams shared and promises made. The script was educated, but not ornate, the sentiments genuine rather than flowery, and Astrid found herself smiling at the personality that shone through even these faded marks. "She writes of you returning from a raid," Astrid observed. "She says the man who left was a warrior, but the man who returned was a husband and father who happened to be skilled with weapons. She knew how to see all of you, not just the reputation. She changed me," Eirik said simply, "made me understand that strength could serve love as well as conquest, that victory meant more than defeating enemies. And now, what does strength serve now?" He looked at her then with eyes that held depths she was still learning to navigate. "Now it serves the possibility that a man can love more than once in a lifetime, if he is fortunate enough to find someone worth the risk." The words should have brought her joy, but instead they stirred the familiar guilt that had haunted her since she had begun to hope for more than mere shelter. She was deceiving him still, not through outright lies, but through careful omissions that grew more dangerous with each day that passed. "Eirik," she began, but he raised a hand to stop her words. "Or whatever else you carry in your past, it matters less than what we build together from this day forward. The chest holds my history, but it does not define my future. Let your secrets keep their own counsel until you choose to share them." His generosity only deepened her guilt. He was offering her the gift of trust, while she hoarded truths that could destroy everything they were building together. The betrothal contract, hidden in the false bottom of her travel bag, the seal ring that marked her as property of House Grimwald, the coded messages she had burned rather than risk discovery, all of it a web of deception that grew more tangled with each moment of happiness she stole. "You are too good for this world," she said, meaning it. "No, I am a man who has learned that life is too short and too uncertain to waste on fears that may never come to pass." He closed the chest gently but did not lock it. "What matters is this moment, this choice, this chance to find joy again where I thought none could grow." Later that morning, as they walked together toward the village center, Astrid felt the weight of watching eyes with particular intensity. Magnus stood in conversation with two of the settlement's younger men, their voices low but their glances pointed. The elder's expression was carefully neutral, but she had learned to read the subtle signs of Viking displeasure. "They speak of us," she observed quietly. "Let them speak. Words cannot change what is true, but words could summon action," as they discovered when Olaf appeared at Eirik's side with the determined look of youth preparing to challenge age. The boy had grown more persistent in recent days, his boyish infatuation deepening into something more serious as he watched the woman he desired grow closer to another man. "Eirik," Olaf said, his voice carrying forced casualness. "A word." They stepped aside while Astrid continued towards Sigrid's dwelling, but she could hear the tension in their voices even at a distance. Olaf's accusations were clear enough, that Eirik was taking advantage of a vulnerable woman, that his grief had made him selfish, that someone younger and stronger would be a better match for a woman of Astrid's obvious quality. "She is not a prize to be won," Eirik's reply carried warning wrapped in patience. "She is a woman with her own mind and her own choices. What grows between us grows with her consent and participation. Does it? Or does she simply have nowhere else to turn?" Olaf's youth made him bold, where wisdom would have counseled caution. "She came here seeking passage, not a husband. Perhaps she accepts your attentions because she fears refusal would mean losing her shelter." The accusation struck home because it echoed Eirik's own fears. Was she truly drawn to him? Or was she simply making the best of limited options? The question had haunted his thoughts since their first kiss, made worse by his awareness of the age difference between them and his own rusty social skills. "That is for her to say, not you," he replied, but the doubt had taken root. Then let her say it freely, without the weight of obligation coloring her words. Give her other options, and see if she still chooses you. Magnus's approach ended their conversation, but Olaf's challenge lingered in the air like smoke from a dying fire. The elder's expression suggested he had heard enough to understand the situation, and his weathered features showed the concern of a man who saw discord growing in his carefully maintained community. "Peace, both of you," Magnus said quietly. "This is neither the time nor the place for such discussions. Olaf, your father needs help with the nets. Eirik, walk with me." As they moved away from the village center toward the fjord's edge, Magnus spoke with the measured cadence of a man choosing his words carefully. "The boy speaks from jealousy, but his concerns are not entirely without merit. Your lady friend has stirred more than romantic interest. There are questions about her true purpose here, fears about what might follow in her wake." "What manner of fears?" "The kind that come when strangers arrive carrying expensive belongings, and speaking with accents that place them far from common birth. Some remember old stories of nobles who fled justice or political marriages, bringing trouble to those who sheltered them." Eirik felt ice forming in his chest. Magnus's instincts were seldom wrong, and if he had detected the same signs that pointed to Astrid's noble birth, others might have as well. "What would you have me do?" "Ask her directly about her past, and accept no evasions. If she brings danger to our people, we must know the nature and extent of that danger. Love is precious, old friend, but it cannot shield a community from the consequences of harboring fugitives." The words hung between them like a blade, sharp with truth neither could deny. As they stood looking out over the dark waters where ice was beginning to form along the shores. Both men understood that the idyll of the past weeks was ending. Soon, choices would have to be made that would test every bond of loyalty and love that had grown in the shelter of winter's isolation. Behind them, the village continued its daily routines, unaware that forces were already in motion that would challenge everything they had built in this remote corner of the world. And somewhere beyond the mountains, riders moved through the snow with purpose that boded ill for anyone who stood between them and their quarry. The runestone message arrived with the dawn, carried by a raven whose black wings cut through the morning mist like harbingers of doom. Magnus found it tied to the bird's leg as he stepped outside his dwelling, the carved stone bearing runes that made his weathered face go pale with recognition. By the time he reached Eirik's door, the elder's usual composure had cracked like ice under spring thaw. "Read this," Magnus said without preamble, pressing the stone into Eirik's hands, "and then tell me your guest has brought us nothing but winter company." The runes were carved with the precision of formal proclamation, their message clear and cold as northern steel. "Let it be known that Lady Astrid of House Grimwald, betrothed of Lord Thorvald the Red, has been found. She will return willingly or in chains, but she will return. Any who aid her flight or shelter her defiance do so at peril of their lives. We come with the dawn." Eirik read the message twice, each word sinking into his consciousness like stones. Through deep water. When he looked up, he found Astrid standing in the doorway behind him, her face white but composed, as if she had been waiting for this moment since the day she arrived. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Known that they would find me, since the day I ran. Known that they were close, since yesterday, when the ravens began circling with purpose rather than hunger." Her chin lifted, with the pride that had drawn him to her from the beginning. "I had hoped for more time, but hope is a luxury fugitives cannot afford for long." Magnus stepped forward, his expression thunder-dark. "You knew this message would come, yet you said nothing. You would let us discover the danger only when armed. Men appear at our doors. What would you have had me do? Confess my sins and watch you cast me out into the snow? Or stay silent and let you choose whether to help based on who I am, rather than what I represented to your enemies?" "She has a point," Eirik said quietly, though his heart felt like lead in his chest. "Would we have been more prepared knowing 3 days ago than we are now? We would have been prepared to send her away 3 days ago, before her presence made us all conspirators in her defiance." Magnus replied sharply. "Now we face armed men who will see our village as complicit in sheltering their quarry." Astrid moved to stand beside Eirik, and he felt the warmth of her presence, even as the cold reality of their situation settled over him like a burial shroud. "Tell us everything," he said. "No more half-truths or careful omissions. If we are to face this together, we must know what we face." She nodded, seeming to gather herself for a confession that would strip away the last of her carefully maintained deceptions. "I am Lady Astrid of House Grimwald, third daughter of Earl Grimwald, the Iron-Handed. My betrothal to Lord Thorvald the Red was arranged to seal an alliance between our houses and prevent a war that would have consumed half the northern kingdoms. And you fled rather than honor your family's commitment," Magnus said, his tone making it clear what he thought of such behavior. "I fled rather than marry a man who had already buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances, who was known for cruelty that extended far beyond the battlefield." Her voice carried steel now, the authority of noble birth asserting itself. "My father sold me to prevent a war, but he sold me to a monster who would have made my life a hell of fear and degradation. So you chose your own comfort over the lives." "That war would claim," Magnus pressed. "How many will die because Lady Astrid found her marriage inconvenient?" The words struck home like physical blows, and Eirik saw Astrid flinch before her composure reasserted itself. "You think I have not considered that? You think I do not carry the weight of those potential deaths? But tell me, Magnus Ironbeard, would You have sacrificed your daughter to such a fate if it would prevent other deaths." The elder's silence was answer enough, and Astrid pressed her advantage. "I am not some pampered princess fleeing duty for comfort. I am a woman who chose uncertain death over certain torment, and if that makes me selfish, then so be it." "What will Thorvald do when he arrives?" Eirik asked, cutting through their argument to reach the heart of practical concerns. "He will demand my return, offering gold to whoever delivers me, and death to any who resist. He travels with at least 20 men, all sworn to his service and bound by oaths of loyalty that override considerations of honor or mercy." 20 men, Magnus mused. "We could muster perhaps 15 fighters, counting every man and boy old. Enough to hold a weapon, not favorable odds for a siege." "There will be no siege," Astrid said firmly. "I will not see innocent blood shed for my sake. When he comes, I will go willingly." "The hell you will," Eirik said, his voice carrying the authority of command that had once directed battles across 3 kingdoms. "No woman under my protection returns to a man who would harm her, regardless of the consequences. And how many of your people are you willing to see die for that principle?" she asked, turning to face him fully. "How many children made orphans? How many widows created, so that you can salvage something from the wreckage of your noble intentions?" The question hung in the air between them like a blade, sharp with truth that cut both ways. Eirik understood the tactical realities as well as anyone. 20 trained warriors against a handful of fishermen and farmers would be slaughter, not battle. But something in him rebelled against the cold mathematics of surrender. "There may be another way," he said slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. "Viking law recognizes the right of single combat to settle disputes. If Thorvald can be convinced to accept such a challenge, he is 30 years younger than—" "Ewan has spent those years in constant warfare," Astrid interrupted. "I will not watch the man I love die for my freedom." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air like confession and curse combined. Love, spoken aloud for the first time in the shadow of approaching catastrophe. "And I will not live knowing I let fear stop me from fighting for the woman I love," Eirik replied, the admission carrying the weight of absolute commitment. "Magnus, how long do we have?" The elder studied the runestone again, his experienced eye reading more than the carved words. "If they sent this at dawn, they are perhaps half a day behind it. They will arrive before sunset, wanting the advantage of light for their initial approach. Then we have hours to prepare." Eirik's voice carried the calm authority of a warrior accepting inevitable battle. "Send word through the village. Every family with children should consider moving to the high caves until this is resolved. Those who choose to stay and fight must understand the risks. You cannot mean to resist them," Astrid said desperately. "Please, Eirik, do not let your feelings for me destroy everything you have built here. What I have built here is worth nothing. If I abandon it when tested—" He took her hands in his, feeling their trembling despite her outward composure. "Love that runs at the first sign of danger is not love. It is infatuation. What we have found together deserves better than cowardly surrender." Magnus watched this exchange with the expression of a man seeing the future unfold in ways he had hoped to avoid. "If we do this, if we stand against Thorvald and his men, there is no going back. Win or lose, word will spread that Ravensfjord defied a lord's rightful claim to his betrothed. We will be marked as rebels and outlaws. Then we had better win," Eirik said grimly, "because the alternative is unacceptable." As the 3 of them stood in the morning light, the runestone's message carved in permanent accusation between them, each understood that the careful peace of their small community was ending. Forces greater than their individual desires were converging on Ravensfjord, bringing with them the ancient choice between honor and survival that had shaped Viking culture for generations. In the distance, smoke rose from the village hearths, where ordinary people went about their daily tasks, unaware that their world was about to change forever. And somewhere beyond the mountains, 20 armed men rode toward a confrontation that would test every bond of loyalty, love, and courage that the settlement had built over the long years of its existence. The runestone lay on Eirik's table like a curse made manifest, its carved runes promising violence and demanding choices no honorable person should have to make. But the die was cast now, and there would be no retreat from whatever fate the coming hours would bring. Eirik's father's shield hung above the great hearth in Magnus's hall, its bronze boss dark with age, but still bearing the intricate serpent design that marked it as a relic of the old ways. 3 generations of warriors had carried it into battle, and now Eirik lifted it from its place with reverence born of blood and tradition. The weight felt familiar in his hands, despite the years that had passed since he last bore arms in anger. "The Serpent of Grimholt," Magnus said, recognizing the ancient symbol. "Your father carried that at the Battle of Raven's Point, and his father before him at Stamford Bridge. It has never known defeat." "Then let us hope its honor remains unstained," Eirik replied, testing the balance of the shield against his arm. The leather straps had been replaced many times, but the wood and bronze had endured, carrying within them the strength of all who had wielded them before. The afternoon sun was already beginning its descent toward the western peaks, and throughout Ravensfjord, the bustle of preparation filled the usually peaceful settlement. Those families with young children had departed for the high caves as suggested, their possessions loaded onto sledges that disappeared into the forest paths known only to locals. But more than half the village had chosen to stay, men and women, alike taking up whatever weapons they could find or fashion. 15 souls willing to fight, Magnus reported, returning from his circuit of the village. "Old Bjorn has found his grandfather's sword, though I doubt he has the strength to swing it properly. The widow Thora insists she can still draw a bow, and her sons stand with her. Even young Helga has taken up a spear, though I tried to convince her to go with the children. And the others? Gone to the caves, or fled entirely. I do not blame them. This is not their fight, whatever we may tell ourselves about community solidarity." Eirik nodded, understanding the mathematics of courage. 15 defenders against 20 seasoned warriors was poor odds by any measure. But Vikings had faced worse and prevailed through cunning and determination. The key would be choosing the battleground carefully and making every advantage count. "The harbor approach is too open," he mused, studying the settlement's layout with a tactician's eye. "And they will expect us to make our stand there, where their mounted charge would scatter us like leaves. Better to draw them into the narrow spaces between the buildings, where numbers matter less than skill." "You mean to fight them in the village itself?" Magnus asked, concerned. "The risk to the buildings? Buildings can be rebuilt. Lives cannot." Eirik's voice carried the finality of command decision. "We make them come to us on ground of our choosing, force them to fight as individuals, rather than a coordinated unit." The preparations continued with the methodical efficiency of people who understood that their lives depended on attention to detail. Barricades were erected across the main paths, funneling potential attackers toward prepared positions. Arrows were counted and distributed, weapons sharpened and tested, armor cleaned and fitted where it could be found. Astrid moved through it all like a ghost haunted by guilt, her noble bearing evident now that the need for concealment had passed. She carried herself with the unconscious authority of one raised to command, offering suggestions born of tactical education that proved surprisingly useful. "Position archers on the rooftops," she advised, pointing to the buildings that commanded. "Clear fields of fire. Thorvald's men will expect resistance at ground level, but few warriors think to look up immediately upon entering a settlement." "You know his tactics?" Eirik asked. "I know his nature. He favors direct assault over subtlety, relies on superior numbers and intimidation rather than clever strategy. He will come straight up the main path with his men in formation, expecting to overawe you into submission. And if submission is not offered, then he will order the attack and expect to crush resistance through overwhelming force. He has never faced opponents who could match his advantages. Every battle he has fought has been against inferior numbers or poorly equipped enemies. The knowledge was useful, but it carried a price that weighed heavily on both of them. Every detail she shared was another step away from the possibility of peaceful resolution, another commitment to the path of violence that would end in death for some and tragedy for all. As the sun sank lower, casting long shadows across the fjord, Eirik found himself drawn to the memorial stone where this strange chapter of his life had begun. Astrid followed, as he had known she would, and they stood together in the gathering dusk, watching light fade from the snow-covered peaks. "I should go to them," she said quietly. "Walk out when they arrive and surrender myself before any blood is shed. It would save everyone. Everyone except you." Eirik's hand found hers, their fingers interlocking with desperate strength. "Do you think I could live with myself knowing I let you sacrifice yourself for my cowardice? It would not be cowardice. It would be wisdom, choosing the course that saves the most lives and condemns the woman I love to torment or death at the hands of a monster. No, Astrid, some prices are too high to pay, even for peace." She turned to face him then, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "What if we are wrong? What if love is not worth the blood it will cost? What if the poets and storytellers have lied to us about honor and sacrifice, and the truth is that practical people make practical choices regardless of the cost to their hearts? Then we will discover that truth together and face whatever consequences follow." He lifted his hand to touch her face, feeling the wetness of tears she refused to let fall. "But I would rather die fighting for something beautiful than live knowing I abandoned it when tested." "You are a fool, Eirik Bjornsson." "Yes, but I am your fool if you will have me." Despite everything, she smiled then, the expression transforming her face from tragic to radiant. "I will have you, you impossible, stubborn, wonderful man. In this world or the next, I will have you." Their kiss tasted of desperation and hope in equal measure, a promise exchanged in the shadow of approaching doom. When they broke apart, both knew it might be the last moment of peace they would share, and both tried to memorize every detail. The way the dying light caught in her hair, the strength of his arms around her, the perfect fit of two souls that had found each other against all odds. "We should return." Magnus's voice cut through their reverie, carrying apology for the interruption, but necessity for its urgency. "Olaf has returned from the watch point. They are coming." The ride back to the village seemed to take forever and no time at all. Eirik's mind automatically catalogued details: the deployment of his people, the condition of their weapons, the angles of approach their enemies would have to use. But beneath the tactical planning ran a deeper current of awareness that this night would end either in triumph or catastrophe, with little room for middle ground. In Magnus's hall, the last council of war convened around the ancient table, where generations of leaders had made decisions that shaped their community's fate. The 15 defenders gathered in the firelight, their faces reflecting the mix of fear and determination that had always marked Viking warriors facing overwhelming odds. "They number exactly 20, as the lady predicted," Olaf reported, his earlier romantic jealousy forgotten in the face of shared danger. "Armed and armored like professional soldiers, riding good horses and carrying themselves like men accustomed to victory." "Their leader?" Eirik asked. "A giant of a man, red-bearded and scarred, wearing mail that speaks of many battles. He carries himself like one who has never known defeat." "Thorvald the Red," Astrid confirmed unnecessarily. "He will not parley or negotiate. When he sees I am not waiting for him with my belongings packed for departure, he will order the attack immediately." "Then we make ready to receive him," Eirik said, rising from his seat. "Magnus, position the archers as we discussed." "Olaf, You and the other young men take the positions between the buildings. Move fast, strike hard, then withdraw before they can bring their numbers to bear. I will meet Thorvald at the main approach." "You mean to face him alone?" Magnus asked. "Alarmed, I mean to challenge him to single combat, as is my right under the old laws. If he accepts, our people need not die. If he refuses, then all will see him for the honorless cur he is, and perhaps some of his men will think twice about following such a leader." The plan was desperate, built on the slim hope that honor might still carry weight in a world increasingly driven by naked power. But it was their best chance, perhaps their only chance, to avoid the slaughter that would surely follow a general battle. As the defenders dispersed to their positions, Astrid caught Eirik's arm. "He will not accept your challenge. He knows you, by reputation, and fears what defeat would do to his standing among his men. Then he will refuse, and his cowardice will be witnessed by all present. Sometimes that matters more than the immediate outcome. And if he accepts, if he agrees to single combat and kills you—" Eirik touched the serpent design on his father's shield, feeling the strength of generations flowing through the ancient. "I bronze. Then I will die as I have tried to live, protecting those who matter most to me. There are worse fates for an old warrior." Outside, the sound of hoofbeats echoed off the fjord's steep walls as 20 armed men approached the settlement, where love had bloomed in winter's depths. Inside, 15 souls prepared to make their stand, knowing that by dawn, either freedom or death would claim them. The shield felt light as air in Eirik's hands as he walked toward destiny, his footsteps marking the drumbeat of approaching war. The blood-stained war horn that had summoned Vikings to battle for 3 centuries sang out across Ravensfjord as the riders crested the final hill, its deep voice echoing off the fjord walls like the call of ancient gods. Magnus had blown it from the settlement's highest point, the sound serving as both warning and defiance, a declaration that free people would not surrender their own without a fight. Thorvald the Red sat his warhorse like a king surveying conquered territory, his massive frame made even more imposing by the war gear that spoke of countless victories. His byrnie gleamed silver in the dying light, and the great sword across his back caught the last rays of sun like captured fire. Behind him, 19 men arranged themselves in the disciplined formation of professional warriors, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold air. "Where is she?" Thorvald's voice carried easily across the distance, trained by years of commanding men in the chaos of battle. "Bring forth Lady Astrid of House Grimwald, and this ends without bloodshed." Eirik stepped forward from the shadow of the buildings, his father's shield catching the light as he raised it in the ritual gesture of challenge. The serpent design seemed to writhe in the flickering torchlight, and more than one of Thorvald's men made the sign against evil at the sight of the ancient war sign. "I am Eirik Bjornsson, called the Broad-Shouldered," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had commanded warriors when Thorvald was still learning to hold a sword. "The woman you seek is under my protection. If you would claim her, you must deal with me first." Thorvald's laugh was like the growl of a hunting bear, full of predatory amusement. "Eirik the Hermit, more like. I know your reputation, old man, but reputation dims with age like a blade that has not tasted blood. Stand aside, and I will allow you to live with whatever pride you can salvage." "My reputation was earned with this," Eirik replied, drawing the battle axe that had carved his legend across 3 kingdoms. The weapon emerged from its sheath, with the whisper of death made manifest, its blade reflecting the torchlight like a mirror of polished steel. "Would you care to test whether age has dulled its edge?" The challenge hung in the air between them like smoke from a signal fire, impossible to ignore. Thorvald's men shifted restlessly, understanding that their lord's response would define him before witnesses whose words would spread across the northern lands. To refuse single combat against an aging hermit would mark him as coward, but to accept meant risking everything on personal skill against a warrior whose legend had not died with his withdrawal from the world. Single combat, then. Thorvald said finally, swinging down from his horse with fluid grace that spoke of deadly competence. "But when I kill you, old man, the woman comes with me willingly, or my men will take her by force, and your village will burn for harboring my property." "Agreed," Eirik replied, though the word tasted like ashes in his mouth. "But should I prove victorious, you and your men withdraw and never return. The lady chooses her own fate, free of all prior claims. You bargain with your life for a whore who ran from her lawful duty?" Thorvald drew his sword, the blade singing as it cleared the scabbard. "So be it. Your death will serve as lesson to any others who think to interfere with my affairs." They moved toward each other with the ritual precision of formal combat, each step measured and deliberate. The villagers watched from concealment, their weapons ready, but their intervention forbidden by the ancient laws that governed such challenges. This was between the two men now, their personal honor and skill the only factors that mattered. Thorvald moved like a man in his prime, his footwork sure, and his blade held with casual expertise. 30 years of constant warfare had honed him to a weapon of flesh and steel, and confidence radiated from every line of his massive frame. He was younger, stronger, and fresher than his opponent, with every advantage except experience. Eirik circled with the patience of age and wisdom, his axe held in the high guard that had served him through 100 battles. His movements were economical, betraying nothing of his intentions, and his eyes never left Thorvald's face. He had learned long ago that a warrior's eyes revealed his thoughts before his body could follow, and he read preparation for attack in the subtle shift of his opponent's gaze. "You could have lived peacefully in your exile," Thorvald taunted, beginning to close the distance. "Died in your bed like a merchant instead of bleeding out in the snow like a fool." "Every man dies," Eirik replied calmly. "Few get to choose the manner. I choose to die protecting something beautiful rather than hiding from something difficult." "Then die with your pretty words, old man." Thorvald attacked with the devastating force that had won him victory in a dozen pitched battles. His sword, cleaving the air in a strike, meant to split Eirik from skull to spine. But the blow met only empty air as the older warrior flowed aside like water, his movement so economical it seemed effortless. The battle had begun, and with it the test of whether love was stronger than conquest, whether honor could triumph over naked power, whether an aging hermit could stand against a lord in his prime and emerge victorious. Steel rang against steel in the gathering darkness, the sound echoing across the fjord like the beating of a giant's heart, while 15 souls held their breath and waited to see what fate the gods would weave from the threads of courage and desperation. The broken shackles lay scattered in the snow where Thorvald had dropped them, their iron links gleaming dully in the torchlight. He had brought them to bind Astrid for the journey back to her unwanted marriage, but now they served only as testament to the arrogance of a man who had never imagined his will could be thwarted by force of arms. Eirik's axe caught Thorvald's sword on its descending arc, the impact sending vibrations up both warriors' arms as steel tested steel. For a moment they were locked together, strength against strength, and the younger man's advantage showed as he began to force Eirik's guard down through sheer power. But power without wisdom is a blade without balance, and Eirik had not survived. 30 years of warfare by matching strength with strength when cunning served better. He yielded suddenly to Thorvald's pressure, spinning away and letting the red-bearded giant's momentum carry him forward into empty air. The axe blade whispered past Thorvald's ribs, parting mail links and drawing first blood. "Clever," Thorvald acknowledged, touching his side where crimson stained his byrnie, but cleverness only delays the inevitable. He came again, this time with the controlled fury of a warrior who had been reminded that his opponent was more than mere reputation. His swordwork was magnificent, fluid, powerful, technically perfect in every way that the weapons masters of great halls could teach. but there was something missing from it, some quality that could only be learned in the space between heartbeats when death walked closest. Eirik had that quality in abundance. Each parry flowed into the next potential attack. Each movement served dual purposes. Each step took him where he needed to be for the opportunity that might come. He fought like a man who understood that battle was not about displaying skill, but about surviving to see another dawn, and that survival sometimes required patience, even when courage demanded immediate action. "You cannot win this by running." "Old man," Thorvald growled, breathing harder now as the fight extended beyond the quick victory he had expected. "Stand and fight like a warrior, not a rabbit fleeing from wolves." "I am fighting exactly like a warrior," Eirik replied, his own breath coming easier despite his years. "Like one who has learned that the enemy's strength is often his greatest weakness, if you know how to use it." The truth of those words became apparent as Thorvald's attacks grew wilder, his technical perfection giving way to frustrated power as his opponent continued to elude the decisive blow that should have ended the combat minutes ago. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold, and his sword arm showed the first tremors of fatigue. Eirik saw the opening and took it with the ruthless precision of age teaching youth its final lesson. As Thorvald committed to another massive overhead strike, the hermit warrior stepped inside the arc of the blade and drove his axe up with all his remaining strength. The weapon punched through mail and padding to find flesh beneath, and Thorvald's eyes went wide with the shock of mortal injury. "Impossible," he whispered, looking down at the axe blade buried in his chest. "I am the strongest. I am the best." "You were strong," Eirik agreed, supporting the dying man's weight as his legs failed. "But strength without honor is just another form of weakness. And you never learned that some things are worth more than victory." Thorvald's sword fell from nerveless fingers to ring against the frozen ground, its song of menace silenced forever. His men sat their horses in stunned silence, unable to process the sight of their invincible lord dying in the arms of a hermit they had dismissed as past his prime. "Your lord is dead," Eirik called out, his voice carrying clearly across the space between winners and losers. "By the laws of single combat, his claim is void. Will you honor the agreement made in his name, or will you prove yourselves as worthless as he?" The warriors looked among themselves, seeking leadership in a moment when their entire world had been overturned by the fall of one man. They were hired swords, bound by gold and fear rather than loyalty or love, and with their paymaster dead, the bonds that held them were suddenly fragile as morning frost. "The contract was with Thorvald," their sergeant said finally. "With his death we have no quarrel with this place. We ride for other employment." They departed as they had come, in disciplined formation, but without the arrogance that had marked their arrival. Behind them, they left only the body of their former lord and the broken shackles that would never bind the woman he had claimed as property. Astrid emerged from concealment and ran to where Eirik knelt beside his fallen enemy, her, hands reaching for him, with desperate need to confirm that he lived and breathed and remained whole. When she touched his face, her fingers came away stained with Thorvald's blood, but her eyes saw only the man who had risked everything for her freedom. "It is done," he said simply, rising to take her in his arms. "You are free to choose your own fate, with no man's claim upon you." "Then I choose you," she replied, her voice breaking with relief and joy and the aftermath of terror. "Now and always, I choose you." The villagers emerged from their hiding places to find the couple embracing in the torchlight, surrounded by the debris of battle, but untouched by its violence. Magnus approached the broken shackles and kicked them aside with contempt, his weathered face showing satisfaction at seeing symbols of oppression scattered like refuse. "Some chains," he observed, "are meant to be broken." The night air filled with voices raised in celebration as Ravensfjord discovered that love, courage, and a good axe could indeed triumph over overwhelming odds. In the distance, the aurora began to dance across the sky, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of green and gold that spoke of gods pleased with the evening's work. The new wedding rings gleamed in the spring sunlight, their simple iron bands catching light like captured stars. Eirik had forged them himself during the long winter nights that followed Thorvald's death, working the metal with the same patient precision he brought to everything that mattered. No silver or gold adorned them. No precious stones marked them as symbols of wealth or status. They were honest rings for honest love, strong as the bond they represented. "Ready?" Astrid asked, adjusting the wildflowers that crowned her dark hair. She wore a dress of deep blue wool that Sigrid had woven specially for the occasion, its colour echoing the depths of the fjord waters where they had first learned to trust each other. "I have been ready since the night you arrived," Eirik replied, offering his arm with the formal courtesy that had marked their relationship from its tentative beginnings to this moment of joyful certainty. "Though I admit I never imagined our story would include quite so much bloodshed. The best stories usually do," she said, taking his arm with the easy grace that had first caught his attention. "They teach us that love worth having is love worth fighting for." The wedding ceremony took place in the settlement centre, where the entire community could witness the union that had begun in storm and secrecy, but now stood revealed in the full light of acceptance and celebration. Magnus performed the ritual, binding, his weathered hands steady as he wrapped the cords around their joined wrists in the ancient pattern that symbolized lives intertwined. "Before these witnesses, and under the eyes of the gods," Magnus intoned, his voice carrying the authority of long custom, "I pronounce you husband and wife, bound by choice rather than obligation, united by love rather than convenience." The cheers that greeted their first kiss as married couples seemed to echo off the surrounding peaks, carrying their joy to the very edges of their known world. Children threw handfuls of early flowers, while their parents raised cups of mead in toasts that wished the couple long life, many children, and the kind of happiness that deepened rather than dimmed with passing years. Young Olaf, his earlier infatuation transformed into genuine friendship, had composed a song for the occasion that told the tale of the hermit warrior and the runaway lady who found love in winter's depths. His clear voice carried their story back to them, transformed by art into something larger than their individual experience, a legend that would outlive them both. "Listen to that," Astrid murmured, leaning close to her husband's ear as the song reached its climactic verses. "He makes us sound like heroes from the ancient sagas." "Are we not?" Eirik asked, his arm tightening around her waist. "Two people who refused to let fear dictate their choices, who chose love over safety and freedom over comfort. Perhaps heroes are simply ordinary people who find the courage to do extraordinary things when circumstances demand it." The celebration continued long into the evening, with feasting and storytelling that bound their personal happiness to the larger life of the community. But as the night grew deeper and the guests began to drift toward their own homes, Eirik and Astrid found themselves drawn back to the memorial stone where so much of their courtship had unfolded. "Will you mind sharing me with them?" Eirik asked, gesturing toward the carved names of his first family. "They are part of who I am, part of what shaped the man you fell in love with." "I would mind if you forgot them," Astrid replied, tracing the weathered runes with gentle fingers. "Love that erases the past is not love, it is conquest. I want all of you, including the parts that were shaped by loss and grief." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the aurora paint the sky in shades of green and gold that seemed to dance in celebration of their union. The harsh beauty of their adopted homeland spread around them like a blessing, promising both challenge and reward for those strong enough to embrace its gifts. "What happens now?" Astrid asked, echoing the question that had marked so many turning points in their relationship. "Now we build a life together," Eirik said simply. "We plant gardens and raise children and grow old in each other's company. We face whatever challenges come with the strength that two hearts can provide when they beat as one. And if my past rises to haunt us again, if other lords come seeking the runaway bride who defied her family's will, then we will face them together, as we faced Thorvald. But I suspect word of his fate has spread by now, along with the lesson that some prizes carry prices too high for wise men to pay. As if summoned by their conversation, a ship appeared on the dark waters of the fjord, its sail bearing the serpent device of House Grimwald. Astrid tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the knife at her belt, but Eirik laid a calming hand on her shoulder. "Peace," he said quietly. "See how she approaches? Under parley flag, not war banner. I think your family has sent envoys, not enemies." The ship carried Astrid's younger brother Eirik and two of her father's most trusted advisors. Come not to drag her home, but to acknowledge the political reality her marriage had created. The defeat of Thorvald had not prevented the war her betrothal was meant to avoid. Instead, it had shifted the balance of power in ways that made her father's previous alliances both unnecessary and impossible to maintain. "Father sends his blessing," Eirik said, embracing his sister with the awkward affection of siblings too long separated, "and his admission that perhaps you chose more wisely than he did. The northern lords have seen what happened to Thorvald and decided they prefer negotiation to conquest. So I am forgiven for my disobedience?" Astrid asked, though her tone suggested the answer mattered less than it once would have. "You are respected for your courage and your judgment. Father says any woman strong enough to bring Eirik the Broad-Shouldered out of exile and back to the practice of arms is clearly a daughter worthy of House Grimwald's pride." The formal reconciliation with her family brought a peace Astrid had not realized she needed, closing the final circle of her transformation from runaway daughter to beloved wife. As spring advanced into summer and summer ripened toward harvest, their life together took on the rhythm of ordinary happiness that is the greatest victory any love can claim. The memorial stone remained in its place of honor, but now it stood, not as monument to ending, but as reminder that love persists beyond death, that hearts capable of deep grief are equally capable of profound joy. And on quiet evenings when the aurora danced above the fjord, two people who had found each other, against all odds, would stand before it hand in hand, grateful for the chance to write a new chapter in the endless story of human love.